We've been getting a lot of really cool gaming devices sent in through the mail recently, and something that got sent in to us from the folks at GearBest is a JXD Singularity. What is that? Well, let's take a look. I've seen a number of portable Android-based video game systems, but I've never seen one that looked as cool as this. This is called the JXD Singularity S192 gamepad, and it's got a 7-inch screen right in the dead center. Oh, and by the way, that screen is also at 1080p. That's right, this thing is a full HD portable game system. Now you might be thinking to yourself, boy, this kinda looks like a Nintendo Switch if like Batman made it. And you wouldn't be that wrong, only the differences between a Nintendo Switch and this is that the internals are gonna be very different and the left and right controllers don't actually come off like the Joy-Cons do. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, seeing as how I don't think there's any games on this platform that would require removable Joy-Cons. But what does matter is the quality of these controls. Now, right off the top of the bat, these left and right thumbsticks work quite well. Combined with the face buttons, I'd honestly say that these remind me a lot of what you'd find on an Xbox 360 and Xbox One controller. The system also has some extra buttons as well, like a start and select button, a menu button, a back button, you've got some physical volume buttons, a power button, 2 left and 2 right shoulder buttons, and a D-pad which feels a little bit too squishy for my liking. And the screen in the center, while also being full HD, also is a touchscreen as well. As soon as I got my hands on this system, the very first thing I did was I took off the protective layer of plastic that goes over top the screen. But when I looked at it, I noticed that the screen seemed to be a little bit warped and weird. And that's when I noticed that there was an additional screen protector underneath the screen protection plastic thing. So when you get this system, if you do choose to buy it after watching this review, know that there may be 2 protection levels of plastic over top of it. But screen protection aside, you've got a lot of input options with this thing. So with those controller options, you should be able to use this system to play a lot of games. At least you should be able to, as long as the system has enough hardware to do it. But what's inside the machine is something that's kind of confusing. Internally, you've got 32 gigs of flash memory where you can save a lot of games and programs under the system itself. And if you're planning on emulating consoles with a bunch of ROMs and ISOs and stuff, you're probably going to want to expand that memory. And that's when we ran into our very first problem with the device. There's a microSD card slot on the bottom, but you just can't use it because in our device at least, it didn't work. There's a chance you might buy this device and it will work totally fine, but for us it was an issue and we didn't get it fixed. So everything you're gonna see here is done with the internal memory. And we were really excited to try this out because we've got 2 gigabytes of LPDDR3 RAM on here and an NVIDIA Tegra K1 quad-core chip that, according to articles I read, is supposed to be far more powerful than the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And let me put that rumor to bed right away. Now yes, maybe this thing does have those components inside, but I didn't find any reasonable way to access the power that was in here, because at the end of the day, you're looking at an Android device, and an Android device needs things to run like software, and honestly, I couldn't find any software that really made use of this specific hardware. One of the leading causes of this problem is that the operating system on here is locked at Android 5.1.1. That's Android Lollipop. We're now several generations away from that operating system, so there's a lot of issues that come with downloading software and games, because a lot of things require the latest operating system, and this one just isn't up to spec anymore. One specific problem I found while trying to test out the HD screen was downloading something like Netflix, which you can't do on here because the operating system is just too old. What we found we could do was download another storefront and download it that way, and then we did get it to work in a big roundabout way, but it's just insane. The operating system should be allowed to be updated beyond 5.1.1, but we just couldn't do it no matter what we tried. Yes, maybe we could flash the hardware and force and install the latest operating system, but we don't think the average consumer is ready for that, especially when you consider that you're spending a lot of money on getting this thing. They should have given you the ability to upgrade a lot easier. But okay, let's put all that aside right now and talk about what you can do with the Singularity with its current operating system. First off, you've got a program on here called Happy Chick, which has just gotta be one of the most illegal pieces of software I've ever seen pre-installed into a system. Not only does it have a bunch of emulators installed that I'm pretty sure they didn't make or own, but they also have a whole bunch of ISOs and ROMs you can download from a store without any cost at all, which I guarantee they don't have the rights for. The quality of the emulations and ROMs on here here is just totally inconsistent, and I don't recommend using this program at all. Even though it's completely free and pre-built in, I'd recommend you delete it, because nothing on here works very well, and if you do happen to get it to run, it will likely crash on you, and it's just a very bad experience overall. So, okay, you're not going to use that happy chick thing, so let's say you want to download some games from the Android store. Well, you're going to be limited because of how old the operating system is, and some games just won't work at all. But there are going to be experiences like Hitman Sniper, which you will be able to download, but for some reason, the game runs at a very low frame rate, which is shocking because it just should run a lot better than this. But at the same time, you might be playing another game that seems graphically more demanding that runs just a lot better, like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and Vice City. They ran perfect on here, and they even utilized the controls without needing any additional setup, which is something you might have to do with certain Android games. Realistically, all the experiences you're gonna have on here are going to be a mixed bag. We played a ton of games, and some worked quite well, and others just didn't. You never know what's gonna happen until you try it, and that's just something weird about this simply because you're just using an older OS. There's also a handful of Android games that you would assume would work with the built-in controls, but they just don't, even if you try to set them up, which is really unfortunate because once that's happened, you have to use the touchscreen to play those games, which defeats the whole purpose of owning this thing if you ask me. And to add one more additional problem, sometimes the physical controls had a little bit of a lag to them, which really sucked, because even if everything was working perfectly fine, it just was really slow on its response, which just made everything suck. But it was at this lowest moment that I decided to emulate some games using third-party software. And folks, this is when the system really starts to sing. You can take a whole bunch of retro games and you know things like Atari and NES and all that stuff is gonna work great. But when you start to emulate PlayStation 1 games and N64 games, that's when you start to have a lot of fun. The Singularity being used as an emulation device is really the way to go. The screen is really nice and sharp, and the resolution being as high as it is means that these games are naturally going to look better than they probably did running on their original hardware. Now, of course, emulation's a tricky thing. Maybe some games won't run as well as others, but in general, I found the experience to be pretty solid. And to make everything even better, this system has a video out, which means you can play this on a nice big TV while using the system itself as a controller. And because this system is Bluetooth enabled, you can hook up a bunch of Bluetooth controllers and have a multiplayer party anywhere you go. And for some of you out there, this might actually be a better purchase than a Nintendo Switch because it's got a much higher resolution screen than the Switch does, and it also has a much longer lasting battery at about 10,000 milliamp hours. But honestly, if you are looking to play more modern games, you're probably better off just sticking with the Switch. The JXD Singularity is a pretty cool emulation device, but I really wouldn't recommend it for basically anything else because it's not very good at a lot of other things. Yeah, it can run some Android games and programs, but not all of them because the operating system is just a little bit too old. At the end of the day though, I really would think that this is something that a lot of gamers out there would like to have in their pocket if they could even fit it in their pockets. Personally though, this thing just isn't for me, but if you like some of the emulation stuff we showed you on there, well, this one might be for you.